So I'm here today to present you the first chapter of my master thesis. I am supervised by Martin Hugues Saint-Laurent, who worked at the University of Quebec at Rimouski, and Christian Dussault at the Ministry of Natural Resources and Wildlife in Quebec. So the first chapter of my thesis is now accepted for publication in Forest Ecology and Management, and if I got the time, I'm going to present you the result that I've got for my second part of my master thesis. So for the introduction, I want to introduce the concept of habitat selection. Habitat selection is a hierarchical process which aims to reduce the influence of the different limiting factor, and the strongest limiting factor will influence habitat selection at the coarsest spatial scales. So during the calving period, the different limiting factors one of them are predation risk. One of them is predation risk, so female will select habitat that minimize predation risk, such as old-growth coniferous forests, open and woodland, peatlands. And one another limiting factor is food availability. During the last stage of gestation and lactation, energy requirements are high, so some studies have demonstrated that food availability is important at the finer spatial scales. So our objective was to assess calving site selection of woodland caribou by investigating the effect of predation risk and food availability at multiple spatial scales. To meet this objective, we used GPS location from a radio-collared female caribou in the continuous distribution range of the boreal caribou in Quebec. And the major disturbance in my study area is forestry activities. This is the distribution of the road network in my study area. You can see that in the southern part, we have a lot of roads, as much as 4 kilometers of roads per square kilometer, while up north we have some places that we have not road yet. This is the distribution of the young cutovers in my study area. The cutovers from 5 to 20 years old, regenerating stands, and this is the mature forest over 50 years old. And if we just took the forest patches that are over 1 kilometer square, this is what left in my study area. So we have a nice gradient of anthropogenic disturbance in my study area. So to determine the calving site, we use the movement pattern of the female. You've seen a picture that looked like this one on the presentation before. Here we have the speed of the female between two GPS locations. And here we have the time, so this is each month. If we take a closer look at the calving period, we can see that female decrease her movement rate. We were looking exactly for this. This is the mobility of the female is restricted by the mobility of her newborn calf. So what we've done, we take all these GPS locations and take the centroid point of that, and we said that was the calving site. So we use resource selection function in order to assess calving site selection, and resource selection function compare what is available to an animal to what it is used. So since we work at 3 different spatial scales, we decided to measure habitat availability at 3 different scales. So at the annual home range scale, we decided to draw the availability at 10 random locations in the annual home range. At the calving home range scale, we decided to draw the availability in 10 random locations in the calving home range scale, And at the forest stand scale, we measure habitat availability at 3 random locations in the same habitat type that the calving location within the calving home range. So we hierarchically structure the availability for each analysis. So at the annual and calving home range scale, we decided to work with GIS variables that were calculated within a circular buffer centered on each calving location and random location. And at the forest stand scale, we decided to do vegetation survey to account for fine-scale habitat characteristics that we cannot capture in a co-forest map, but that may be important for the determination of the calving site. So we proceed by model selection. So we translate our different hypotheses into different candidate model, and we test and we look at the fit between we look which candidate models support best our data. So at the annual home range scale, the best supported model was the road model, but the cutover was really close, so we decided to model average those two. And this is the result for the forest, for the annual home range scale. So we see that females select to calve at higher elevation, and female avoid to calve where road density is high. So road, we've seen it yesterday, is associated with higher predation occurrence, so higher predation risk, and elevation is used in order to segregate from wolf and alternative prey, and also it can be used to detect and escape more efficiently different predators. Now at the Calving home range scale, the best supported model was the road model, and here are the results for the road model. So pretty much the same thing. We have females select higher elevation, they avoid peatlands, and they avoid road density. And at the forest stand scale, the best supported model was a complete model. We have 14 different variables in the complete model, so I decided to group some of these. So these 3 variables are associated with the density within a stand. So what we can say that female avoid to calve in dense stands. Further, female do not select stands with higher food availability compared to random location. So female decided to calve in low food availability stands. And here we have a positive effect of one interaction, and I decided to make a figure. It's easier to understand. So we have here the relative occurrence probability, the elevation, and I fitted 3 different curves in order to see what their interaction does. So what we can see is that at lower elevation, the distance to the nearest young cutover did not have a great influence on the probability of a calving site, while at a higher elevation, females tend to calve farther from young cutovers than randomly expected. So our objective was to assess predation risk and food availability, was to assess calving site, and look at the predation risk and food availability trade-off. So what we found at the annual home range scale, it's a selection for higher elevation and the avoidance of high road density. So we can relate it to predation risk. The results were pretty much the same for the Calving home range scale. So predation risk may drive the selection pattern at Calving home range scale. And at the forest stand scale, we have results that, well, the first result is that females avoid to calve in dense stands, and we hypothesize that females select to calve in lower basal area stand to to enhance visibility and detect predator more efficiently. And or further, they do not select stand that have high food availability. So we think that predation risk drive the selection pattern at the forest stand scale. So from the coercive spatial scale till the final spatial scale, predation risk drive all of this, and female did not seem able to lower predation risk sufficiently through habitat selection to move in order to reduce food availability. So to reduce predation risk, we recommend amalgamating all forestry activities within intensive management zone in order to isolate large patches of suitable calving caribou habitat. And if not possible, we recommend concentrating all forestry activities in low-lying areas to spatially isolate caribou from forestry activities. The second part of my master is about calf survival. Between 2009 and 2011, we call it 30 caribou calf. And here are the results. So we have a mean survival rate of 43%. We have a mean survival rate of 33%, and the primary mortality agent was black bear predation. We have no wolf predation confirmed, but it might be some in the unknown predation, but black bear was the primary predator in our study area. This is how it's distributed, the survival within time. So here we have the survival function and the age of the calf. So we can see that survival decreased rapidly, quickly in the first month, and then tend to stabilize, but we have some mortalities occurring around the 85 days of life of the fawn. So now what I'm going to do in the next couple of weeks is to relate predation to some proportion of habitat in the annual home range, the Calving home range. And what I want to do is to relate habitat selection with Cox proportional model hazard model and some logistic regression to assess habitat selection. What does habitat selection on predation? And I want to incorporate some functional response in order to fully understand how the predation risk is distributed in my study area. So I want to thank all of these people who work with me on this project. Thank you very much.